Front here bringing a bit of patchy rain, but for most places it's dry. Yes, some places seeing a fair bit of cloud, but most seeing some blue sky on Sunday. Certainly probably a brighter day for East Anglia and the southeast. Some good spells of sunshine here, and as a result it will be warmer. Where we see some sunshine, 18, 19, 20 or 21. Again, some of the coasts will be a little bit cooler. Enjoy your weekend.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country and indeed across the world. We have plenty coming up. As most of the counts across the country have been completed in the local elections, we'll be getting all of the political reaction with brilliant guests from all political sides. Plus, however, there's one set of counts that are still going on. We are awaiting the final results of the Northern Ireland vote, as Sinn Féin is set to become the largest party in the Stormont Assembly. We'll be keeping you right up to date on all of the latest this afternoon, and we'll have live reaction to it as well. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. It's midday. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Conservative Party has lost nearly 500 councillors across England, Scotland and Wales in the local elections, with Labour, the Lib Dems and the Green Party making significant gains. In Scotland, the SNP remains the largest party, whilst Plaid Cymru gained 3 councils in Wales. Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi told GB News the elections were tough for the Conservatives, but no better for Labour.
I think we have to learn the lessons from this. Not in any way take what we're doing in places like the West Midlands for granted, but also try and win back in London and the South. So it's a mixed picture, tough night for us, but I don't think it's any better for Labour in the sense that Keir Starmer has gone backwards in places like Nuneaton. They've stood still even in Hartlepool.
Well, Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr, Khalid Mahmood, told GB News Labour has done well in the South and London, despite being unable to regain red wall seats.
I think where we're coming from is a very high base of 2018. And so, therefore, it's interesting to see how well we've done in retaining those seats. and the Conservative Party losing some of those seats. We got a huge issue in 2019. Where we lost a significant number of parliamentary seats as well. And to show that we now steady the ship and want to move forward, we've made fantastic gains down south, particularly in London, which has been really good.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Vince Cable, told GB News his party made gains because the government has become unpopular due to Partygate and the cost of living crisis.
In the areas where we're facing the Conservative Party, we've done exceptionally well in the south of England. But in your part of the country, up north, we've done well in Hull, and we've taken also in places like Barnsley and Sunderland, where you had uninspiring Labour councils, we've cut through there too. And clearly the government was unpopular, and that was a factor. But, you know, we do pride ourselves on being active in local government.
Well, as Alistair just said, counting continues in Northern Ireland, with Sinn Féin poised for a major victory. GB News' Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie is at Belfast's largest count centre. Well, it seems like we're having a little bit of trouble getting hold of Dougie right now. UK intelligence shows the war in Ukraine is taking a heavy toll on some of Russia's most capable units. The Ministry of Defence says it will take considerable time for Moscow to rebuild its military, with sanctions making the replacement of advanced equipment challenging. It comes as Ukrainian officials accused Russia of violating a ceasefire as they tried to evacuate civilians out of Mariupol. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says a further 50 were rescued yesterday, but more than 100 are still trapped. A consortium has agreed terms to buy Chelsea Football Club from Roman Abramovich in a £4.25 billion deal. It's led by Todd Boehly, co-owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team. Mr. Abramovich has been forced to sell after being sanctioned by the UK government over his links to Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The Queen's speech will include an overhaul of mental health powers to stop those with learning difficulties being detained without their consent. The Prime Minister says a draft mental health bill to be announced next week will ensure no patient is detained unnecessarily. Downing Street describes the current Mental Health Act, which was introduced in 1983, as outdated. A further 18 children have been found to have sudden onset hepatitis, bringing the UK total to 163 currently. The Health Security Agency says the adenovirus may be causing the severe liver condition, although investigations continue. Cases surged following the pandemic, with the most common symptoms being jaundice and vomiting. So far, there's been no fatalities. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. We'll make our normal start in just a moment, but I'm delighted to say we're going to dip straight into that breaking story that I mentioned right at the top of the show and Ray just talked about, and that is the local elections continuing, the count continuing in Northern Ireland, where history is set to be made as the Republican Party Sinn Féin is on course to be elected as the largest party in Stormont for the first time. But it's by no means as simple as that. The party is in a tight battle with the Democratic Unionist Party, whose vote share dropped for the entitlement to nominate the next First Minister, and the alliance is also creeping up upon it all. So let's get more on that, the very latest indeed from Belfast, with our political editor Darren McCaffrey, who is there for us now. Such exciting things going on right now.
Indeed, quite a momentous day, it must be said, an historic day in many regards, Alistair. Never before in the history of Northern Ireland, its 101-year history, has a nationalist party, a party that essentially wants to see the reunification of Ireland, top the poll. It has now happened. Sinn Féin have received not just the first number of first preference votes, but in the end they've also going to have the most number of MLAs. Why has this happened? Well, it's come primarily, as you've rightly pointed out, at the expense of the DUP, the main unionist party here in Northern Ireland, that's seen its vote drop quite substantially. The unionist vote in many ways is splintered in three different directions, from the DUP to the Ulster Unionist Party and to the more hardline traditional unionist voice, which has taken a very strong view on the Northern Ireland Protocol. That party has done particularly well. So what does it mean, though, for Northern Ireland, the very fact that Sinn Féin has topped the poll? Well, what it fundamentally means is that they will get to nominate who the First Minister is at the next Assembly in the Executive. The problem is that that Executive had been suspended before these elections, and there's little sign that will be resurrected, because unionists want to see that Northern Ireland Protocol changed before, frankly, they're prepared to go back into power with anyone. Other notable things that must be said today is, you're right in pointing out, the Alliance Party, that centrist party, have also done particularly well. A reminder here that not all politics is green and orange, that there are people who frankly don't want to necessarily identify through the politics as either nationalists or unionists, and they have done very, very well indeed. They're currently up 3 seats to 10. We're about slightly more than halfway through in terms of the number of MLAs that have been elected. I think, though, overall, Alistair, it's important to remember this, because it will be reported in this way. Does this mean that a united Ireland is now more likely, the fact that Sinn Féin have topped the poll? In some ways, yes, but in most ways, no. And the reason I say that is because the unionist vote does still pretty much remain strong in Northern Ireland. Actually, support for the union remains pretty steady over the last couple of decades. It is not up to Sinn Féin to decide to call a referendum. That's up to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. And in the end, as I say, while this is an historic, momentous day for this province, it's not a day that I think is going to fundamentally shift politics in the short or indeed the medium term.
All right, Darren, thank you very much indeed. Great to work with you yesterday and great to be working with you again today. You stay exactly where you are and then bring us the latest as it develops. Our political editor there, Darren McCaffrey, live from Belfast. Talking of which, Thursday was supposed to be about who represents you locally, runs council services, empties your bins, fills potholes and much more besides, whether it's Belfast or Nuneaton or any part of the country. It was made a heck of a lot more dramatic with a midday announcement of a rise in interest rates by the Bank of England and a warning that we're heading for 10% inflation and possibly a recession. Well, today's newspapers are awash with two things: how the cost of living crisis hurt the Tories across the UK and how the UK is increasingly fractured, with Plaid doing well in Wales, the SNP strengthening their position in Scotland, and as you've just heard, Sinn Féin, a party committed to attempting to reunite the island of Ireland, topping the poll in Northern Ireland. Now, all of that said, the turnout was low. 70% of you just didn't bother to vote. The Tories took a hit in London, losing Westminster, Barnet and Wandsworth to Labour. But as the day unfolded, it was clear that Labour's London hurrah wasn't going to be repeated up and down the land. They won a bit and they lost a bit, as indeed did the Tories. Then came the explosive announcement that Durham police were to reinvestigate allegations that Sir Keir Starmer and others broke the COVID lockdown rules. Well, Labour losing Hull, John Prescott's old stamping ground, to the Lib Dems was pretty tasty, and to be fair, the Lib Dems did have a good night, as did the Greens and the Independents. On the results, however, the best that Labour could hope for in the current climate, if it were a general election, would be to be the largest party, but without an overall majority. For the Tories, however, the consensus seems to be that unless they crack the cost of living crisis, their problems will persist and deepen. For me, however, Sinn Féin coming top of that poll in Northern Ireland was the high point. Steeped in the bloody history of demands for Home Rule and independence for Ireland, it was in effect the political wing of the IRA in the 1970s, topping a democratic poll. It is committed to a border poll, although, as Darren just said, it's by no means automatic. It's got to be agreed in London. It's also got to be agreed in Dublin. But it seems to be the will of the people as expressed at a ballot box right now. Forget Partygate and Beergate for a moment. That really is serious constitutional and historic stuff. So today we'll have the latest from Northern Ireland, halfway through the count, a top team from the main parties, Conservatives, Lib Dems and Labour, brilliant businessman with whom I exchanged tweets during the week about that Bank of England increase in interest rates as consumers feel the squeeze and the economy slumps towards a recession. We'll also have a personal finance expert to reflect upon it. But as always, I would like you to reflect upon it all and share your views with us on the elections, the state of the economy, the unity of the United Kingdom and the stability of it, and all the rest of it. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk, tweet us or me, or go on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, GB News. And I'm delighted to be joined here live in the studio by Damien Green MP, former First Secretary of State and Minister for the Cabinet Office, and Jo Phillips, former Press Secretary to the Lib Dem leader Paddy Ashdown, and now herself a leading political commentator. Come to you first of all, Damien, if I may. I mean, the thing that struck me most working on these results yesterday was it could and should have been a heck of a lot worse for your party if you reflect simply on the political history of the last couple of years, whether it's COVID, whether it's Boris Johnson. It was a hammering, but it wasn't a fatal hammering.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, but I'm not going to come here and be sort of remotely complacent or try and spin a line that it was anything other than bad. Losing 500 seats around the country is terrible. I describe it as a sort of dark sky with odd points of light. You know, even in London, winning Harrow, which came as a shock to everyone and a pleasant surprise to me. And particularly in the Midlands, we did pretty well. And as you just said, Labour didn't make many advances. But the lesson I draw from purely the English results is that keeping, if you like, the Boris Johnson coalition, the 2019 coalition together, requires attention on both sides. It's not all about, these new red wall seats, to use the cliche. Actually, there's a lot of what you describe, what you think of as heartland Conservative seats, and voters there they weren't going Labour because Keir Starmer doesn't excite any enthusiasm at all, but they were voting Lib Dem or Independent. And, you know, if we lose votes, then that worries me wherever we're losing them to. And I think paying attention to that is one of the key tasks ahead. Yeah, Jo Phillips, come in on that point if you would, because we were chatting outside before we came into the studio, and I said to you, I thought Hull, John Prescott's old stamping, and Alan Johnson. I mean, it was really
absolutely.
It's kind of pure Labour territory. But to pick up upon that point that Damien just made, in reality, much more significant was Crawley, Worthing, the South Coast. Although your headline numbers were not brilliant, as Sir Vince just pointed out, your geographical pickup was really quite exciting for you.
And I think that's what's interesting. And I mean, Damien and I are both in Kent, but neither of us had local elections. So I think it's really important to point out that these were not countrywide elections. They were in bits, a little bit like the rays of light or the dark clouds that Damien referred to. So you can't draw the same conclusions as if they were a complete set of national elections. For the Liberal Democrats, I think it means that again, I mean, the Liberal Democrats traditionally have always been geographical. It used to be the southwest. It is clear that they are now much more palatable to disaffected Tories in the south and the southeast of England. And I think, as Damien rightly says, that should be worrying the Tories because, you know, they've got that red wall, the sort of the Brexiteer cohort, if you like, of disaffected, fed-up Labour voters. They can probably keep them on side, depending on the cost of living, which I know we're going to talk about later. But the Lib Dems, I think, if they get those councillors, what the Liberal Democrats are really good at, and what, you know, my old boss, Paddy Ashdown, was great at, it's local stuff that counts. And you know that, Damien, you know, it's what people come to your constituency surgery for. It's what they're writing to you about. It's what happens on your own doorstep. And I think when we've had COVID, we've got the war in Ukraine, we've got the cost of living, and people will become more and more inward looking at what's happening to them, to their families, to their kids. And I think that's where the Lib Dem strength lies.
We will indeed come to the economy in a bit more detail in a moment, but let's stick with Boris Johnson for a moment, because the confusion within the newspapers, perhaps it's depending where the editor is coming from or the owner is coming from, is some say that Boris Johnson remains under serious pressure and in deep trouble, and a number of colleagues of yours are sealing the envelopes to Sir Graham Brady and what have you. What's your objective assessment?
My objective assessment is that most colleagues have said, and will continue to say and do, that let's get all the evidence in first. At the moment, the police investigation is still going on. We haven't seen the Sue Gray report yet. And what a lot of people, including me, have said is let's actually, rather than reach a verdict before we've had the evidence, let's have the evidence first. And on both sides of the argument, there are those who just say, it's all fluff, let's ignore it, and others who say, clearly he's got to go now.
But Nadeem Zahawi, who did interviews on other channels earlier on today as well, seemed to be saying the key point is he remains a vote winner. He unites the party. He's not a vote winner on the basis of those results. And secondly, you said uniting the party remains a work in progress.
Well, it wasn't uniting the party. I didn't say that. What I said was that actually
the factions.
Well, no, it's not. It's not the. In that case, I was talking about voters. Actually, that
okay.
What people in places like Worthing, places like Kent, where we didn't have many elections this time, but will do next year. A lot of them, if you like, are traditional Conservative voters, and they want to see a competent, tough-minded administration that doesn't have embarrassments and gets on with the job. And you know, we would forget those people at our peril as a party, because they are the solid backbone of the Conservative Party and also pillars of the community more widely.
Yeah. Joe said, essentially, and in my introduction did as well, that it's supposed to be all about local issues, and it's right, and it's at its best when it is. Patently it wasn't on all of the opinion polling. There wasn't an exit poll because it wasn't that sort of thing, but people who were asked, it was all about the economy and the cost of living crisis. That he does need to address, and 2 or 3 of the broadsheet newspapers are saying he needs to get rid of Rishi Sunak and get a tax-cutting chancellor in there.
Well, I mean, I think the idea that you react to a set of local election results by sacking your chancellor would be wrong and a bit daft, and it's the sort of thing people.
But it might be the right thing to do to address the mood of the people.
But I think addressing the mood of the economy, of the people on the economy, is clearly sensible, and there will be a budget later in the year, and at that. And clearly 2 things. We will know by then whether the energy crisis is sort of baked in and permanent, in which case there is obviously a case for providing people with relief on that, and also how best to promote long-term growth, which is obviously what we need in the economy as a whole. And I would, as a personal view, be very happy that you go through 2 stages. One, decide how much you can spend, because actually being responsible with public finances is absolutely at the core of Conservative values, and I would completely support a Chancellor doing that. But if it's decided that there is money to spend, I would like to do that in a Conservative way, and do that by relieving burdens, cutting taxes and so on, rather than necessarily just spending public money directly. I think that would be a sensible Conservative response to the cost of living crisis.
If they do start to do that, and I suspect Damien's absolutely right, because come October, November, the budget, I suspect they will do that. And in terms of doing it without borrowing even more, you know better than I do, there's a war chest there of between 50 and 70 billion pounds that may wait until the general election, or it may be pushed out if the problem gets going. It then poses another set of problems for you, and to be fair to Labour as well, and that is that you arguing brilliantly about local issues in Durham ceases to be relevant, because it will win back those wavering souls in Worthing, in Crawley and in the south of England. They'll suddenly say, they've finally seen the light again, and we're going back home.
The trouble is, Alistair, Boris Johnson, as we know, has got no attention to detail, no plan other than being Prime Minister. He's surrounded himself with lackeys who are pretty incompetent as a bunch of cabinet bunch.
I mean advisors or cabinet colleagues?
No, cabinet colleagues.
You think Rishi Sunak's incompetent?
Yes, I do, actually. I think, when you get somebody who I absolutely hold no flag for, but when you get somebody like Ian Duncan Smith actually saying, this is ridiculous, people are really suffering, and calling on the Chancellor to do something about it. No, we know there are things beyond the government's control. We know that the war in Ukraine and global shortages and the problems in Shanghai and COVID and so on and so forth are beyond our control. But when you know that you've got a Chancellor who broke the triple lock guarantee while inflation's beginning to
This is
come
on the
up.
pensions.
On the pensions. You've got benefits that are only going up 3% when inflation's running at 8% and probably 10% by the end of the year. You know there's an energy crisis coming, and you still go ahead with your national insurance. And also, you know, the Conservative manifesto said no tax increases. Well, the government has increased taxes.
I mean, and this is an essential division, because what Joe has just said is we must spend more money in every area and we must cut taxes.
It's not necessarily.
That's just not responsible. That's no way to run a government.
Dominic, sorry. Woo! Nasty slip there. Must go to get my eyes tested.
We like that. That's nice. We're all friends here as well.
I've been mistaken for many people in my time. That's a new one.
My apologies. But, I mean, when you look at things like energy prices, when you look at the cuts in the real terms, cuts in benefits, that's not about spending more money. That's about having a longer-term vision. When you look at the billions of pounds that have gone into fraudulent contracts for COVID suppliers, and nothing's been done, apparently, to track those down.
I'm going to drag you back from that, not because I don't want to hear about it, but with due respect, I've heard about it lots of times, and that's also subject of other big inquiries that are going on. But let me bolt together before coming finally to the union, as it were, something that you were both saying there. And what I'm crying out for, as someone who's a genuine Democrat and loves politics and loves detail as well, is actually a fundamental debate about exactly that. The degree to which the state bails folk out and says, oh, we can sort it out, we can solve everything for you, which is part of your mantra and part of Labour's mantra, and the degree to which the state says, to a degree, you've got to stand on your own 2 feet to the best of your ability as well. Where is that debate?
Well, and that is the problem, and I think you're absolutely right, Alistair. And I think
is that debate raging within the Conservative? I mean, David Frost writes a lot about it, and you mentioned Duncan Smith and Redwood as well. There clearly are a number of people who want that debate and know what the answer is.
Well, and so do I, and I'm on a different wing of the Conservative Party from all of them. But absolutely, I think what the sort of set of proposals Joe just made is illustrative of what the left says, and what all of us on the right would say is you can't keep just spending taxpayers' money, because otherwise you run out of other people's money, as Margaret Thatcher famously said. And secondly, that if people think that the state can solve all of their problems, then they're in for sad disappointment. People have tried to run societies like that, and they don't work. They're not only intrusive and anti-freedom, they don't work economically either. So there does come a point, and it falls to Chancellors of the Exchequer to say we can't just keep spending money.
Absolutely.
But I don't think it is.
Finally and briefly, Joe.
Yeah, and my argument is not for the state to do everything, but I think you have to look at the broader picture, and, you know, there are people who are really going to suffer.
And indeed that. So, Damien had his go, you had your go. My final point is that's exactly the debate that I want to have, and we will return to it whenever we can here. Going to move the union to 1 o'clock, because we'll have the latest from Belfast and what's happening in Northern Ireland, and then we will talk about how it fares. But for the time being, Damien and Joe, thank you very much indeed. You are watching Alastair Stewart and Friends, and indeed listening on radio, many of you. It is 6 minutes to 1. We've lots more coming up on today's programme, including, as I just said, heading over to Northern Ireland to get the very latest on the count there, as the Republican Party Sinn Féin is set to become the largest party in Stormont. All of that, but first let's bring you the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking bright and dry for many, but with rain holding on across the far southeast. Let's take a look at the details. There'll be plenty of warm spring sunshine across southwest England this afternoon. Temperatures will once again be above average for this time of year, reaching around 20 Celsius. However, it's a different story for southeast England. Here it'll be largely cloudy with the risk of some showery rain in places. Heading over to Wales, it's going to be mostly dry and sunny this afternoon, with just a little bit of cloud bubbling up from time to time and feeling warm for all. Now, there's a risk of a few showers as we move over to the Midlands and into northwest England, though most places will stay dry, a little fresher along the coast, but highs of 18 Celsius inland. Northeast England will be mainly dry too, with just the odd shower possible inland. The best of the sunshine will be along the coast, but feeling fairly cool here with highs of 13 Celsius. Plenty of sunshine to come across northern Scotland, but the risk of a few lighter showers elsewhere across the country. Another warm day with highs of 17 Celsius. The cloud will come and go across Northern Ireland, allowing some bright or sunny spells to break through. Just the odd light shower possible too, with temperatures hovering around 16 Celsius. So most parts of the country will have a fine end to the day with some late low sunshine before dusk, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's coming up to 12:30. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. We've spoken in depth throughout the day about the local election results across the United Kingdom, and counting in the Northern Ireland Assembly election has resumed, with the Republican Party Sinn Féin set to win the most seats for the first time in an historic poll. It is in a battle with the Democratic Unionist Party, which for ever and a day was the largest party. Their vote share has dropped for the entitlement to nominate the next First Minister. Our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie joins us live now for the very latest, and that's the room, like an aircraft hangar, where all of those votes have been counted. We already pretty well know, don't we, that Sinn Féin is going to be the largest party. We're just waiting really to get the full scale of it. I think they're about 3/4 of the way through counting the constituencies.
Yes, they're nearly finished here in Belfast. Just a few more to go. But yes, you're quite right. Sinn Féin is edging towards being the largest party. They're probably going to return with about 27, 28 seats. Now, they did leave with 27 seats. The DUP were on 28 seats. That has now changed. We think that the DUP will either be alongside them or one less, but then they would still lose on first preference votes. Now, they're going to be elected to an assembly that will not sit, because the unionists here are very angry about the protocol. They've asked Boris Johnson to fix it. Liz Truss was over. She was looking at fixing it. It's all around the question of consent. And of course, there are no MEPs in Northern Ireland. Done through Dublin. We are no longer part of the EU, but we're only half in and out of the UK. It is a very, very strange political situation. Now, the Good Friday Agreement, of course, was built on consent, and the First Minister in this DeHaan-style government is voted by and given the amount of ministries by the amount that is brought back. Now, just before we came on the air, I spoke to the former First Minister, Paul Givan. He told me that if those issues around the protocol were sorted out, that the DUP would have no problems going into government. They would get together, sit down and have a programme for government. And I think that's probably because they realise the first thing that Sinn Féin will not be the first thing, but be one of the things that they will ask for is a border poll. And of course, a border poll in Northern Ireland would be extremely divisive, especially when you have two parties joint so closely in numbers. Now, today, the middle ground, that of the Alliance Party, took vast steps forward. We reckon they're going to finish with about 16 seats. They have basically gobbled up the Ulster Unionist Party and the Social Democratic and Labour Party. And if you remember, that was John Hume's party, and David Trimble was the head of the Ulster Unionist Party. They signed the Good Friday Agreement. They were the biggest in there, and in 2003, the DUP and Sinn Féin stole the clothes of both parties and went into government. Now, they did work quite well until 2017. It had its hiccups and it was brought down and back and forward. But the biggest thing about this is once one border poll is done, it will be called every 7 years, and that will be divisive for economy, socially, and I suppose politically. So it's all to play for in the next probably 2 to 3 weeks before we even see a government coming.
Fascinating update. Thank you, Doogie. And Doogie will be back with us, as will Darren as well, a little later on, to give us the that final result when it's stamped, sealed and delivered, and further reflection upon what it really means in terms of Brexit and the protocol and that border poll. But for the time being, Doogie, thank you very much indeed. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. It's 33 minutes past 12. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon, including discussing the disabled children of Ukraine, the victims of the Russian invasion that have been left without proper care. All of that to come, but first let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Ray Addison.
It's 12:33. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Conservative Party has lost nearly 500 councillors across England, Scotland and Wales in the local elections, with Labour and the Lib Dems making significant gains. In Scotland, the SNP remains the largest party, whilst Plaid Cymru gained 3 councils in Wales. Meanwhile, counting has resumed in Northern Ireland, with Sinn Féin poised for a historic victory. A consortium has agreed terms to buy Chelsea Football Club from Roman Abramovich in a £4.25 billion deal. It's led by Todd Boehly, co-owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team. Mr. Abramovich has been forced to sell after being sanctioned by the UK government over his links to President Putin. The Queen's speech will include an overhaul of mental health powers to stop those with learning difficulties being detained without their consent. The Prime Minister says a draft mental health bill, to be announced next week, will ensure no patient is detained unnecessarily. And one of the UK's most wanted fugitives has been arrested in Spain. The National Crime Agency says 30-year-old David Ungi from Liverpool was being sought for his alleged role in the murder of 18-year-old Vinnie Waddington in 2015. Ungi is the 3rd most wanted target captured in the space of a week. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Stay with us. Alistair will be back in a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's coming up to 20 to 1, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. The horrific images of the war in Ukraine are sadly familiar to all of us. But last week, new pictures came to the fore. Disabled children, apparently abandoned in orphanages and homes. Disability Rights International have conducted an investigation into the human rights of the disabled children who've been left behind in Ukraine. Their investigation found harrowing evidence of thousands of young disabled children in some of the worst conditions in institutions that don't have the facilities to cope. I'm joined now by Eric Rosenthal, the founder and executive director of Disability Rights International, and he's been working with human rights and disability activists and has provided assistance to governments and international development organisations worldwide. Very good of you to join us. It's one of those daft, naive questions, but it's a genuine one. How did this come to pass? Was it simply because this is a country torn apart by the Russian invasion?
No, it's actually a problem that's been years in the making. We did a report back in 2015. Ukraine happens to be a country with a labyrinthine system of institutions with more than 100,000 children and countless numbers of adults with disabilities who've been put away in Soviet-era facilities that they inherited, that segregate them from society, that were abusive before the war. These places should never existed. No child should ever be in an orphanage. But when a war comes, these are the people left behind. And what they've done is that they have evacuated the children from the war-torn East. The less disabled children have been moved out to Europe. And what we found, sad to say, is that the more disabled children were just dumped in orphanages in the West. These places are crowded. They're overwhelmed. They don't know how to respond to their needs. And they are in very difficult and dangerous circumstances.
This issue, clearly, you and colleagues have raised with the Ukrainian government. And again, I'm not being flippant, but they are somewhat preoccupied with other matters at the moment. But are they in denial about this problem? Because I was intrigued where you said there, Eric, that this was a pre-existing problem. It hadn't suddenly resulted as a consequence of the war.
Well, it was a pre-existing, 100,000 children put away that should never have had. So yes, it was a pre-existing problem. But when you take a bleak facility, when you take a place with limited staff and then you dump more people in, those staff, there are a lot of heroic staff trying their best just to keep kids clean, but they are overwhelmed and there's little that they can do. The problem will not be solved overnight. But what's essential is, number one, they need medical care, they need personal attention, they need love, they need touch, they need stimulus, and those are things that must be provided immediately. But long term, there needs to be a commitment to get these people, these children, back to families, back into the community.
Yeah. As you were saying all of that, Eric, we were showing, some of our audience joins us on radio as opposed to television, and just to help them, we were showing pictures of the buses bringing refugees out and the border crossings. These people, these disabled children, you said were hopefully predominantly in places of safety. But it's a lot more difficult to get them out, and we know it's tricky enough to get refugees who are able-bodied and not challenged.
Right, absolutely. I mean, the refugees are the lucky ones. The kids with the more severe disabilities who've been left behind in these orphanages are in very dangerous situations. I mean, to the outsider, if you're in a nice, clean room sitting in a bed, that may seem, okay, they're safe. But they're not safe. These children are being tied down at night. Picture an adolescent, any adolescent that you know, lying in bed all day with absolutely nothing to do, sedated. Children need love. They need attention. Simply warehousing them is not a safe alternative, certainly not in these conditions.
The thing that struck me most when I read the briefing notes about your organisation and what you're doing and the scale of the problem, and saw pictures on television as well, was that it reminded me of the early 1990s in Romania, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the execution of the Ceausescus. The discovery there in orphanages of able-bodied and disabled children was just appalling. It resulted in a large number of charities being formed here in the UK and elsewhere across Europe to go in and sort those problems out. Blunt question to you, Eric. Is this a problem waiting to be discovered in pretty well all of the post-Soviet Union countries in Eastern Europe?
Yes, absolutely. It is a problem that is not limited to Ukraine. The situation, obviously, in a war in Ukraine is particularly bad, but there are many countries with institutional populations, exactly as you said. It was discovered in Romania. I was there in Romania. I saw the situation, and many of the conditions we see in Ukraine are very much like Romania way back when. I mean, we saw untreated hydrocephalus, kids with water on their brain, with their skulls so enormous that they, will slowly die in a torturous death. I mean, so there are immediate needs just like that. But what we learned from Romania is a lesson that we must apply to Ukraine. In Romania, there was a very big mistake that money was poured in to rebuild those orphanages rather than to get them out. Kids with disabilities were the last ones whose needs were met. So let's not make the mistakes we made in Romania. We need to get those children into families. Rebuilding orphanages is not enough. Putting them in group homes and small places is not enough. Every child needs the love and care of a family. And they deserve the same rights as all other children. And the outpouring of generosity to Ukraine now must extend to those children to make sure that they are not abandoned.
Eric Rosenthal, great to talk to you, and thank you for that detail and on the nature and scale of the challenge. Very good to see you with us here on GB News TV and Radio. That's Eric Rosenthal, founder and executive director of Disability Rights International. Now, as I said in my introduction, at midday on polling day, the Bank of England raised interest rates by 0.25% to 1%. The bank also published its assessment of the economy, predicting that inflation could reach 10%, growth would slump, and recession threatened. Now, I was not alone in suggesting that raising interest rates as the economy heads for a recession isn't necessarily the brightest move. Higher rates choke off demand. Among those who seemed to agree with me was Hugh Osmond, entrepreneur and businessman, and of course the founder of Punch Taverns. And to be frank, his thoughts are a lot more important than mine on this subject. So we invited him to join us, and I'm delighted to say there he is. Great to see you. You said, and I quote, "I will not believe that the Bank of England have the faintest Scooby about economics." They basically got it wrong, in your view, as someone at the front line of a recovering economy.
Yes, completely. I mean, there was a time to raise interest rates, and it was probably 2012 or 13 or 14 or 15 or 16 or 17 or 18. But to raise them now is absolute economic insanity. The inflation we're seeing now is due to a horrific combination of supply side shocks. So it started with the disruption of lockdown, which completely messed up global supply chains all around the world, not to mention deliveries, transport, and so forth. And then you've got, the absolute meteoric rise in energy prices, which was partly caused, it was caused by a terrible energy policy across Europe for the last 10 years, but then the war in Ukraine has absolutely sent energy prices through the roof. You've got food and prices now rocketing because of the crops in Ukraine elsewhere and bad crops in South America. And you've got a general shortage of goods due to disruption in China, Russia, and so everything imported from there is also in short supply. So you've got four absolutely horrific supply side problems, each of which would be highly problematic in their own right, and which together are an absolute nightmare in terms of likely inflation and cost of living. But none of them is because of the excessive demand. And so these are supply side shocks, and interest rates will do absolutely nothing to address any of them and will make the whole situation hugely worse and potentially tip a potentially mild recession into a very deep recession.
Let me push you further, as it were, on the policy side of these things, because you will remember you were in business at the time when Gordon Brown and Ed Balls gave independence to the Bank of England to set interest rates because that was felt to be wiser, sounder. It meant that there wouldn't be political interference in something so profoundly important to the whole economy. Do you think there's now an argument for Rishi Sunak to pick up the phone to the Bank of England and say, sorry, guys, the state we're in economically is such that I'm going to change those rules and here's what I want you to do to help save the economy?
Well, not necessarily to take control, but I think the targeting is very wrong. I mean, what happened? I mean, some of these issues go back a long way, as you know, Alistair. So really going back to the late 90s, interest rates and cheap money have been available. That should have come to an end in 2008. And it would have ended with a horrible depression. I mean, thanks to a policy that was really invented, if you like, or certainly proposed by Ben Bernanke, the catastrophe of 2008 was averted. But rates were never raised again, and all the money printing that happened following 2008 was never reversed. And one of the reasons was that the targeting for the central banks was retail price inflation, whereas the inflation we saw through the 2000s was asset price inflation. I mean, asset prices went through the roof because of all this free money, cheap money, what have you. The stock market went through the roof, tech stocks, private equity, real estate, bond prices, you name it, because the banks were looking at retail price inflation, and so they weren't controlling asset price inflation. And now the reverse situation has occurred. We've got kind of horrible retail price inflation, but that is actually nothing to do with the cheap money. The cheap money caused lots and lots of problems and shouldn't have been allowed to continue. But the problem we've got now is not the cheap money, it is a supply side shock. So the central bank mandate in terms of looking at a target range for retail price inflation is just simply wrong. It's wrong for the economy. And if it's not addressed, you know, the Bank of England and the other central banks could, as I say, turn a short recession, which will be bad enough anyway, into something much, much worse. And it's just economically illiterate to do what they're doing.
There's a lot of argument within the broadsheet newspapers, not least The Telegraph, which has a leader about it, but also Juliet Samuels, who's written a brilliant piece. And it knocks onto the politics of it, but it says basically deep down, unless the Conservative government embraces tax cuts and urgently, this will be a catastrophic recession that the Bank of England has at least predicted accurately. As a frontline businessman, how urgent to you is the idea of putting money back in people's pockets?
Look, it's very urgent indeed. I mean, I've seen various estimates of the figures that it could cost an average household, something around £4,000 a year is now being mentioned. That is a huge amount of money for the average family. If you raise interest rates on top, say 1%, and you know on a £100,000 mortgage, that's another £1,000 on top of that. So this is, you know, a potentially very dangerous situation. And the government does need to act really, really quickly. They need to reverse NI, and they need to come up with policies that will partly rectify the cost of living, of which raising interest rates is absolutely categorically not one. I mean, we are headed for a recession. The Bank of England has said it itself. Germany is already virtually in recession, and their latest numbers are looking horrific. You do not ever raise interest rates going into a recession, and you need to do exactly the reverse. And the reason they're in difficulty, of course, is they've already spent so much money on COVID over the last 2 years that, in a sense, the cupboard is bare. But in this instance, they will have to sort of get through that and just work out policies that do something to alleviate this cost of living crunch, and try also to put in place policies that will address the supply side, these 4 supply issues that I mentioned, so that we get better supply of energy, better supply of food, free up the labour market, don't depend so much on Russia and China for goods. Now, unfortunately, these aren't things that can be done very quickly, but the policies need to be put in place, or this won't be the last time this kind of thing happens.
All right, Hugh Osmond, I hope it's not the last time we talk about it either. I'm not to predict that it will happen again, but I always enjoy our conversations from the informed front line of business as well. That's Hugh Osmond, entrepreneur and, of course, founder of Punch Taverns. To reflect on that and the cost of living generally, I'm delighted to be joined now by Laura Suter, who's head of personal finance at AJ Bell and former investment editor of the Daily Telegraph. Telegraph having a good afternoon so far. I do read other newspapers, but there's a lot of very good stuff in the Telegraph. Let me pick up on that main point of Hugh's, that in effect, on Thursday, the Bank of England not only predicted a recession, but also made it a self-fulfilling prophecy by raising interest rates. Do you agree with that?
I think what they talked about was that stagflation is going to happen. So, put simply, that's where we have high inflation and lower or no growth in GDP. I think their concern is that a recession is on the horizon, and basically they're between a rock and a hard place, because if they nudge too much and raise interest rates too many more times, that could push us into recession. But at the same time, they feel like they need to react to this soaring inflation that's expected to hit 10% by the end of the year, and they feel like they can't simply do nothing. So they're in a kind of balancing act between stagflation and recession.
Yeah, fascinating. And as Hugh also said, in effect, it's a policy that should have been done years ago to curb the massive influx of money that went into the economy post-2007-8. And those of us who remember Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson know all about the big money supply argument. That's not a bad thing to be doing. Is there any upside at all, from your perspective as a personal finance expert, that savers may, after years and years, finally get a little bit more back on their money, even though there's no way it's going to get ahead of inflation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, interest rate rises are really good for savers, and they've had, like you say, decades of putting their money away and getting very little reward for doing so. We've already seen, off the back of the previous interest rate hikes, we've seen savings rates go up quite dramatically. And what you see is a bit of fighting to be top of the table from various different banks. So that is great news for savers. I think the kicker to that is that lots of people saved money during the pandemic when we all couldn't go out and spend money on the fun things that we usually do. What's probably quite frustrating for some savers is lots of people are having to use those savings now to pay for the cost of living crunch. And so at the time when interest rates are going up and they could see a return on their savings, actually they're having to use them to pay for energy bills or to pay for their food shop. So I think for lots of people, it's quite frustrating that these rises and the benefits on their savings are coming at a time when actually they're having to use them.
Fascinating. Matches the analysis that the former Deputy Prime Minister Damien Green gave at the beginning of this programme as well. As an impartial observer, and you're a journalist but also an expert with a big financial institution, how urgent in your mind is it that the government changes tack on taxes and national insurance? Hugh was clear on it. Damien implied that he thought it was what they should be trying to do. It may come in the autumn budget, but we shall see. But as you look at it and write about it and advise clients about it, how urgent is that challenge?
Incredibly urgent. I think what we're seeing is some people came out of the pandemic struggling financially anyway. And then on top of that, we've got this soaring inflation driven by rising energy prices, food bills going up. Now what we're seeing is interest rates going up, which means people with variable rate mortgages or people with debt are also going to see their costs rising. And I think initially everyone talked about this being a bit of a flash in the pan and that energy prices would settle down again. Obviously, no one really foresaw the Ukraine crisis happening, and that's obviously had an impact on energy prices. But what it means is that in October, we're going to see the next energy price cap change. And that means that energy prices are going to go up again for households, just as we head into winter. And at the same time, inflation around that time is expected to be 10%, partly driven by energy prices, but that also means other costs are going up. And so while last year, I think people felt like they had a bit of a tough winter, particularly with energy price rises, I think next winter is going to be even tougher. And what we saw in the last spring statement from the government was some tweaks to that national insurance policy that will benefit some people, but very little help specifically for energy costs and specifically for those lower earners that are on benefits, perhaps, or single income families.
Laura Stewart, a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your expert analysis and joining in that conversation that Hugh ably set rolling as well. Do keep in touch. Be good to talk to you again sometime. Thank you very much indeed. That's Laura Stewart, Head of Personal Finance at AJ Bell, and herself a former investment editor at the Daily Telegraph. It's just coming up to 2 minutes to 1. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon. We'll be continuing our conversation on the local election results and what it means for you. That's right after this break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, it's 1 o'clock. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Conservative Party has lost nearly 500 councillors across England, Scotland and Wales in the local elections, with Labour, the Lib Dems and the Green Party making significant gains. In Scotland, the SNP remains the largest party, whilst Plaid Cymru gained 3 councils in Wales. Education Secretary Nad told GBNews the elections were tough for the Conservatives, but no better for Labour.
I think we have to learn the lessons from this, not in any way take what we're doing in places like the West Midlands for granted, but also try and win back in London and the South. So it's a mixed picture, tough night for us, but I don't think it's any better for Labour in the sense that Keir Starmer has gone backwards in places like Nuneaton. They've stood still even in Hartlepool.
Well, that's the Conservative view. Labour MP for Birmingham, Perry Barr, Khalid Mahmood, told GB News Labour has done well in the South and London, despite being unable to regain red wall seats.
I think where we're coming from is a very high base of 2018. And so therefore, it's interesting to see how well we've done in retaining those seats and the Conservative Party losing some of those seats. We got a huge issue in 2019 where we lost a significant number of parliamentary seats as well. And to show that we now steady the ship and want to move forward, we've made fantastic gains down south, particularly in London, which has been really good.
The former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Vince Cable, told GB News his party made gains because the government has become unpopular due to Partygate and the cost of living crisis.
In the areas where we're facing the Conservative Party, we've done exceptionally well in the south of England, but as in your part of the country, up north, we've done well in Hull, and we've taken also in places like Barnsley and Sunderland, where you had uninspiring Labour councils, we've cut through there too. And clearly the government was unpopular, and that was a factor. But, we do pride ourselves on being active in local government.
Well, counting continues in Northern Ireland, with Sinn Féin poised for a major victory. Former First Minister of Northern Ireland and DUP representative Paul Givan told GB News it's a strong pro-union result in Northern Ireland, but it's been splintered across parties.
Divided unionism doesn't win elections, so we need to learn the lessons from this election. But we also need to look at what were the reasons for that. And it was the UK government under a Conservative party that put in the protocol which has put a border within the United Kingdom down the Irish Sea, and that has created huge tension within the unionist community. We need to see action from the UK government to address the issues which has created the political instability here in Northern Ireland, because I want to see Stormont up and running, but that'll only happen whenever unionism and nationalism can work together.
In other news, Russian missile strikes have hit the southern port city of Odessa, regional officials report. It follows UK intelligence reports that the war in Ukraine is taking a heavy toll on some of Russia's most capable units. The Ministry of Defence says sanctions mean it will take considerable time for Moscow to rebuild its military. In Mariupol, Ukrainian officials have accused Russia of violating a ceasefire as they tried to evacuate civilians. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says a further 50 were rescued yesterday, but more than 100 are still trapped. Well, here at home, a consortium has agreed terms to buy Chelsea Football Club from Roman Abramovich in a £4.25 billion deal. It's led by Todd Boehly, co-owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team. Mr. Abramovich has been forced to sell after being sanctioned by the UK government over his links to Russian leader Vladimir Putin. And one of the UK's most wanted fugitives has been arrested in Spain. The National Crime Agency says 30-year-old David Ungi from Liverpool was being sought for his alleged role in the murder of 18-year-old Vinnie Waddington in 2015. He was arrested on Thursday night along with 3 other men as they arrived at a gym in Malaga. Ungi is the 3rd most wanted target captured in the space of a week. And a further 18 children have been found to have sudden onset hepatitis, bringing the UK total currently to 163. The Health Security Agency says the adenovirus may be causing the severe liver condition, although investigations do continue. Cases surged following the pandemic, with the most common symptoms being jaundice and vomiting. So far, there have been no fatalities. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Great, thanks very much indeed. It's 1:05, and we'll be joined in a moment once again by my studio guests, and a new one. I'll tell you about her in just a moment. But first, let's go straight to Northern Ireland, where history is set to be made. You could argue it's already been made, as the Republican Party Sinn Féin is on course to confirm that it has elected more candidates than anyone else and has become the largest party in Stormont for the first time. It's in a tight battle, as you just heard, with the Democratic Unionist Party, whose vote share has dropped for the entitlement to nominate the next First Minister. Well, let's get more on all of that now with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is live in Belfast for us. Darren, over to you.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Alistair, voting is continuing here in Belfast. Things move at a slightly glacial pace here because of the electoral system they use in Northern Ireland, but most actually of the MLAs here in this Belfast Council Centre have been elected. They're kind of sweeping in the remaining ones. But you're right in saying this is a pretty momentous, historic day in many ways for Northern Ireland. Never in its past has a nationalist party, a Republican party, a party that wants to see a united Ireland, never have they topped the poll before. But that is exactly what Sinn Féin have done. They were well out in the lead when it comes to first preferences. The DUP, the main unionist party, saw its vote somewhat collapse to a large degree. Just to give you a sense that when the last Assembly elections were held, the DUP were just ahead of Sinn Féin by 1,500 votes. Now, today, Sinn Féin on first preferences ahead by 66,000 votes. Almost certainly they're going to be the largest party in the Assembly when it comes to MLAs. Also, the really notable story here as well, Alistair, is how well the Alliance Party, that cross-community middle ground party, if you like, a party that says that it's neither nationalist or unionists, it has attracted a really sizable percentage of the vote. It looks like it's going to do very well. It's already picked up a net gain of several MLAs, and it is a reminder that not for everyone in politics here in Northern Ireland, it's whether you're green or orange, and a sign that people are drifting away from that kind of tribal sense of politics. I think, though, ultimately, in the end, when you look at kind of the bigger, wider narrative, what's at play here? First of all, the Assembly is going to get back up and running. The question is, will the Executive get back up and running? It was suspended before these elections, and almost certainly it's not going to be up and running in the next couple of weeks. And why is that? It's because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Unionists campaigned strongly on the Northern Ireland Protocol. The TVV, the traditional unionist voice, did very well taking a hardline position on this. Unionists essentially refusing to go back into government until the British government try and renegotiate that deal, that Brexit deal with the European Union. It's going to prove pretty tricky, but this is the heart of politics here. And one other thing, Alistair, as well, is where does this leave us with a big national question? Because ultimately, in Northern Irish politics, even though what I said about people drifting away to the centre, the national question, the constitutional question is still the big one. Does Sinn Féin's win make a united Ireland more likely? You could say it does, but in the whole, it probably doesn't. Support for the union is still quite strong in Northern Ireland. Actually, opinion polls show it hasn't really moved much over the last couple of decades. Ultimately, if there was to be a referendum, it's up to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, not whoever is First or Deputy First Minister. But clearly, this is a turning point and a sign, I think, of the direction, the demographic direction of Northern Ireland, which is effectively that the nationalist community is becoming stronger.
And I assume that that was a result, perhaps just confirming that direction of travel. It would have been rude of either of us to talk over the will of the people.
Indeed. But yeah, as I say, they are still electing it. I can't see quite from here who it is, but yeah, the results are still coming in. It may well be later on tonight. Yeah. Before we get a proper firm picture of the makeup of the Assembly. And then, as I say, the really tough stuff begins, Alistair, about how do they get Stormont up and running again with a proper executive while having to try and deal with that Northern Ireland Protocol, because at the moment I'm not entirely sure that's going to work, as I say, without that change to the protocol.
Darren, great to get that update from you and that live action of the excitement of politics there in Belfast. Keep in touch with us, and you've been saying there to give us the absolute breaking story as and when it happens. But for the time being, Darren McCaffrey, political editor, thank you very much indeed. Now, I'm still joined by my guests, Joe Phillips, former press secretary to the Lib Dem leader Paddy Ashdown, and the Conservative Member of Parliament for Ashford, Damien Green. Also this hour, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden, Siobhan McDonough, and we'll continue our conversation on the political reaction to the local elections across the United Kingdom. But Siobhan, first of all, thanks very much indeed, and I will ask you about Sir Keir and Durham and the rest of it. But I want to start where we just left off with Darren in Belfast. It's something that you know a lot about and are intimately involved with. How concerned are you, reflecting upon all of those local elections in Scotland, in Wales and in Northern Ireland, that the union is now in play?
I'm not. I mean, I think we've known for some time that a Sinn Féin victory in the elections was going to happen. As Darren said in his piece, we're a long way from a vote on the reunification of Ireland. And we see not only the rise in nationalism as a effect in the ballot box, but we also see a rise in the kind of more mainstream parties who want to vote about other stuff. So I don't think there's any imminent difficulty.
Important to remind folk who may or may not know that the, as it were, the mainstream parties in the rest of the United Kingdom do not contest elections in Northern Ireland, but you have a closeness to the SDLP, and Damien Green, my other guest here, his party is by definition the Unionist party as well as the Conservative Party. Is that right, that should remain the case, as opposed to giving folk in Northern Ireland the chance to vote Labour or vote Conservative or vote Liberal Democrat?
I think it's right, and my view is not shared by everybody in my party. But as you've said, the SDLP is our sister party in Northern Ireland. They know the experience on the ground. They have the history and the base to represent people and to run their elections. I don't think it's the job of the Labour Party to do that.
Let me bring Damien in at that point. I said I got my tongue twisted, but Conservative and Unionist party. To what extent do you think that she's absolutely right, that it's been in play for quite some time, since Tony Blair's year and devolution and the rest of it, but the union is not so much in play as in jeopardy?
I think that's probably too strong a phrase. I mean, it is an arresting fact that of the 4 countries in the United Kingdom, 2 of them, the largest party on these most recent elections, actually want to break up the UK. But in a sense, that doesn't tell the real picture, I don't think, because certainly all the evidence, I agree with Siobhan and what Darren McCaffrey said, that actually if you held a border poll now, there would be quite a solid majority for Northern Ireland to stay in the UK. So the Sinn Féin victory in this election doesn't reflect an underlying constitutional crisis, if you like. There will be other crises there for obvious reasons with the Assembly and the protocol and so on. But and similarly in Scotland, if anything, over the past couple of years, the strength of attachment to the Union in polling on that straightforward question has grown slightly. So the SNP can organise themselves to win elections, but actually, I get the impression, for all their rhetoric and bluster...
Yes. Well, certainly all the last 4 or 5 national polls in Scotland have not suggested a simple majority in favour of independence.
No, and that would explain why they don't want to put it to the test, whatever they say.
Joe, at the heart of being a Liberal Democrat, or in the old days, a Liberal, is localism. This crosses a line from local community politics to national politics. And is it your view, as an experienced Liberal Democrat, that not only is it in play, he says, not jeopardy, but something's going on there that the UK parties need to perhaps be a little more alert to?
I think they do, and I think certainly the rise and continued rise of the SNP in Scotland was as a large result of Labour taking them for granted. I mean, the Conservatives have always had difficulties in Scotland, but Labour took them for granted. The SNP came through, and they've carried on.
Yeah. Tories regularly had half a dozen and more seats in the Thatcher era up in Scotland.
But they were never...
do now.
Yeah. But she was saying in trouble.
We weren't the sort of the big players.
No, we weren't the urban party.
No, exactly. And there was there was the Ruth Davison bounce, which was great. A formidable politician. But I think what Siobhan's just said is true, that you've got the SDLP, you've got the Unionists, for the rest of us, if you like, you've got the Alliance. Yeah. But it's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of this is suggesting that the really big issues that have divided Northern Ireland, that have divided Scotland and to a lesser extent Wales, I suppose, actually are going to come back to the bread and butter stuff, which is the cost of living.
Absolutely.
What's going on in Europe, how we come out of post-COVID, rebuild, etc., etc. And I think, although, there are the big issues, the most important thing for Northern Ireland is to try and have some sort of stability in running.
Well, they've got 28 days.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Siobhan, let me come back and fulfil my promise to you as well. As Sir Keir was always so pleased to say at Prime Minister's Question Time to Boris Johnson, why are you still here? Given that Durham police are now re-investigating him, and the act of being investigated alone is supposed to be a resignation matter in his mind, why is he still there?
Well, because a great deal of pressure has been put on the police in Durham to look at this again. I don't know Keir well, but what I know about him is he obeys the law, and as a lawyer has particular concern that he does that. So I don't for any minute believe that he has infringed any rules at all.
Suggesting here on GB News that it's a result of political pressure that has led the Durham police, rather than, to quote them from their own statement, fresh evidence that has led them to reinvestigate these charges?
I think so. I mean, there's been a complete frenzy in certain sections of the media about it, and they've made a decision to open it again, and that's what they have to do, and I hope they investigate it thoroughly and properly. But I think anybody knowing Keir Starmer would be absolutely sure that he's not broken the law.
Let me bring you in at this point, Damien, because I was talking to Michael Portillo on our election coverage programme yesterday, and he made a general point that actually plays slightly to what Siobhan was just saying about Durham, but also about the Met. He said it is outrageous that these investigations are being conducted by different forces that have different rules and different interpretations, when actually our democracy is on the line here, whether it be your party leader or Siobhan's party leader.
Well, we have a system of policing that is divided into geographical forces, so they're run by different people. And I think if they're investigating politicians, what I would ask the police to do is to behave exactly as they would if they were investigating alleged offences by people who weren't famous. I mean, not just politicians, anyone. I want the police to police everyone the same. And that's what we should ask of the police. And I've not heard anything to suggest that they're not doing that in this case.
Sure. The final point to Siobhan, if I may, and then I'll come back to Jo for her final take on it. And it's this. Whether one is pro-Labour, Conservative or Liberal Democrat, the local government elections on Thursday seemed to tell us was that what everybody was deeply and gravely concerned about was the cost of living crisis. Do you not have to sharpen up the clarity of your offer beyond just a windfall tax on the oil companies? People out there want a clearer picture of what would happen were you in 18 months' time, 24 months' time, to form a government. I don't know what Labour's economic policy is beyond windfall tax.
I completely agree with you, Alistair, that we have to show what we're offering to the people. What would a Labour government offer? I think we're beginning to fill out on that, those economic details. We've got, abolition of non-dom status and quite a number of other policies. But, we're coming from a near-death experience in 2019. Our results in the local election, I think, were good, and I think they're getting better every few hours since the election. Very often, the initial results don't seem to be as good as when we look at it back in a few days. But nobody would argue that we're the fully formed alternative that we should be. But we are making progress, and I, for one, am very grateful for that.
Said it's still a work in progress. Keir said it was a turning point.
Well, yes, a turning point, but not the final destination. We're on a journey, and, we've got to do our very best for the British people and make sure that we're right, bring forward a fabulous new young team around Keir, which he is not too frightened to do. We've got some great people, some great politicians for the future, and, we're making progress. Rome wasn't built in a day, and unfortunately the alternative Labour offer wasn't built in a day either.
Yeah. Good to talk to you, Siobhan, anytime. You're very welcome on GB News. Thank you very much indeed. Siobhan,
thank you very much, Alistair.
As promised, final word to you. I thought that was an intriguing concession, not an admission, but a concession, that there's a senior Labour backbencher who used to basically run the Labour Party in London as well. She knows what she's talking about. Her party and her leader have got to flesh out what the real economic offer is. It takes us right back to how we ended our conversation in the first chunk. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, it is.
Pennies dropped.
Absolutely. And good for her for saying it, good for them for recognising it. I think we've had, with the current government under Boris Johnson, we've had initiative after initiative with no flesh on the bones. They're just announcements and headlines.
And in one word, that's exactly the argument and debate you want to have.
It's always the economy stupid. I mean, that old phrase is true, and never more than at difficult times like this. And that's why we have a levelling up agenda. That's going to be the heart of the next.
Joe Phillips and Damien Green, thank you both very much indeed. And just in case you thought for a brief moment my old friend Damien Green was being rude to me by saying it's the economy stupid, it's a famous quote of James Carville, who was Bill Clinton's not unsuccessful strategist. What's this election all about? It's the economy, stupid. Thank you both very much indeed. Right at the beginning of the programme, just a few moments after midday, I asked for your thoughts on our big topics of the day, local election results and the economy, which we've just been talking about. Roy gets us rolling. Is it true that over 2/3 of the voters never voted this time? We voted, but speaking to people, they are sick of the media and the way they have pushed the Partygate and negative news over the past 12 months. And that seems to reflect against Labour too. I did say that, Roy, at the top of the programme, because the data does suggest that the turnout was only about 30%, which leaves 70%, which means that only about a third of you voted, so 2/3 didn't. Mark says Scotland looks lost, Northern Ireland looks lost, Wales is more than halfway gone. It really does look like Boris and his useless team may have started knocking the nails into the UK's /GB's coffin for good, and the lefties seem to be getting their wish, the downfall of the four countries partnership. It's RIP to the United Kingdom and Great Britain. Well, it's a view. We discussed it here. We troweled it over, and I don't think it's dead yet. But I'd like to hear your views, and I do share them. So keep those views coming in, and also do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News, and you can watch previous programmes as well. Now, someone who wasn't put off running, and indeed running in Tory colours for those local elections, was an old friend of this programme, Darius Nassimi. What is more, we talked to him first as he was confirmed as the first British Afghanistan Conservative candidate in the United Kingdom. Well, he won, and he's here again with us. Still with your rosette on. Yeah. I think that's allowed. I'll have to double-check with Ofcom, but we've had Liberal Democrats, we've had Labour, so why shouldn't we have you? It was a close-run thing.
It was, and I think for the first time in nearly 30 decades, we won in a Labour area. At a time when, many Conservatives in Conservative areas like Westminster, Barnet, Wandsworth, they lost to Labour, but we still won in a Labour area. Personally, I got 1,373 votes, just actually 41 votes less than Labour, which I think is a huge, tremendous achievement. I mean, in the past, no Conservative candidate got even close to 900 votes in Hamworth Village. The difference was always between 500 to 600 people. But this year, as a result of working very hard every day, speaking with the residents, we managed to reduce that.
It's early days for your political career, but I have a deep down feeling that it's going to be an intriguing and fascinating one that will run and run and run. London is very difficult to get your head round as a Conservative, because you can win the mayorship in Croydon, you can lose Westminster, Barnet, Wandsworth, but you pick up Harrow. What was the sense that you were picking up on the doorstep when you went around and said, "Hi, I'm Nassim, vote for me, I'm a Conservative"? What were they saying? "Oh, yeah, I love you because of X," or "Oh, I'm not sure because of Y"? What were you sensing there?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's no doubt at all that the local elections was shaped by the national mood. I mean, for us to have gained...
Is that a good thing?
No, because as a local election candidate, people were talking to us about national politics. I mean, for us to have gained so many more Conservative voters, when many people were using this election as a protest vote to signal that they're not happy with the rise in living costs, with the fuel prices, with Partygate. I mean, that's a huge achievement in itself. But at the same time, the voter turnout was only 31% out of 12,000 people.
Just had an argument with one of our emailers about that. I'm glad you've confirmed it.
But I think at the same time, you know, we as a local Conservative, we got caught in the crossfires. In the crosshair, because people were talking to us constantly about Boris Johnson and about Partygate, and I kept reminding people that, remember, this is a local election. We need to have a balance, a healthy balance in the council. There should be some opposition. But at the end of the day, I think the election turnout, I remember I was standing outside the polling station from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m, and then after that we were invited to the counting night, and I was awake till 6 a.m. in the morning. I remember outside the polling station, the voter turnout was very low. Yeah. And I think the reason behind that was people were fed up, in a sense, from both sides. So people were like, OK, the Labour's been in this area for over 30 years, they've let us down, the potholes are broken, the littering and fly tipping is still a big issue, crime is increasing. But then at the same time, you've got the Conservative national government. And what people were telling me is, OK, fine, you're a nice man, we'll vote for you. But if Conservatives win in the local election, isn't that going to give legitimacy to the Prime Minister, which a lot of people... Yeah, because if Boris Johnson will say, look, we won, people still like me.
Yeah. I do find it fascinating, and earlier on in the conversation we had Damien Green, the former Deputy Prime Minister, in your colours, and Siobhan McDonough, very senior Labour backbencher in London, saying that precisely is the debate that people are hungry for out there. Yeah. If you did form a government in 12, 18, 24 months' time, what would you do on the economy? Are you up to discussing that in the context of a local government election?
Yeah, I mean, in the context of local government election, especially in Hounslow, what I was telling people is we need to spend more money in Hamworth. Yeah. We need to spend money on, for example, creating opportunities for young people, you know, fixing people's windows and boilers, cleaning up the roads and pavements, resurfacing. People were telling me that I mean, it was a great experience. I made lots of new friends. It was very fun. It was very fierce. It was a very tough campaign. And I'm happy that at least before the election, there were 3 Labour. After the election, there's 2 Labour and 1 Conservative. So we still managed to win a seat in Hamworth Village, which is a very strong Labour area.
Yeah, sure. But then I want you to keep in touch with us. I've got to end now because we're just coming up to the break. But I genuinely want you to keep in touch because I've enjoyed meeting you first time and to, as it were, track your story. And you're not just a partisan book banger. You do genuinely talk about what it's like on the front line. So we'll do this again sometime. But for the time being, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Darius Nassimi, Conservative councillor, Hanworth Village in Hounslow. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. It's just coming up towards 1:30, but we've still more to come on the final half hour of our programme, including heading back once more to Northern Ireland to find out the very latest on the voting there. That's right after this break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m, as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 31 minutes past 1. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Conservative Party has lost nearly 500 councillors across England, Scotland and Wales in the local elections, with Labour and the Liberal Democrats making significant gains. In Scotland, the SNP remains the largest party, whilst in Wales, Plaid Cymru gained 3 councils. Meanwhile, counting continues in Northern Ireland, with Sinn Féin poised for a historic victory. GB News' Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie is at Belfast's largest count centre.
Well, welcome to the Titanic Exhibition Centre here in Belfast. One of the counts has just finished there now. This is 239 candidates across 18 constituencies battling for 90 seats for a government that may never sit. Sinn Féin is predicted to be the largest party back with 28 seats. They left with 27. The DUP will only be 1 or 2 seats behind that. But I think the real story of this is the middle ground. The SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Party have lost massive ground to the Alliance Party. They're due to come back with about 16 seats. We'll keep you updated the rest of the day.
A consortium has agreed terms to buy Chelsea Football Club from Roman Abramovich in a £4.25 billion deal. It's led by Todd Boehly, co-owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team. Mr. Abramovich has been forced to sell after being sanctioned by the UK government over his links to President Putin. The Queen's speech will include an overhaul of mental health powers to stop those with learning difficulties being detained without their consent. The Prime Minister says a draft mental health bill to be announced next week will ensure no patient is detained unnecessarily. One of the UK's most wanted fugitives has been arrested in Spain. The National Crime Agency says 30-year-old David Ungi from Liverpool was being sought for his alleged role in the murder of 18-year-old Vinnie Waddington in 2015. Ungi is the 3rd most wanted target captured in the space of a week. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Stay with us. Alistair will be back in a moment.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. It is 27, nearly 26 minutes to 2, so we have the last half hour of our programme, and thank you very much indeed for being with us. I hope for the whole programme here on GB News TV and radio. As Ray just said in his news bulletin, the counting in the Northern Ireland Assembly election has resumed, with the Republican Party Sinn Féin set to win the most seats for the first time in an historic poll. So far, 53 out of 90 seats have been counted. It is in battle with the Democratic Unionist Party, whose vote share has dropped, and it's about the entitlement to nominate the next First Minister, and runner-up gets the Deputy First Minister. Well, our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, has been there throughout for us, and he joins us again for a final take on what the very latest is from Belfast. Dougie, what are you hearing?
Well, I think the DUP are pretty resigned to that they are going to be second place here. Sinn Féin are jubilant, as you can imagine, as are the Alliance Party, who have finished very healthy third place. They're estimated to probably get about 16 seats here. This whole circus, if you like now, moves to Stormont on Monday, where they will try and form a government. But of course, that will not happen because of issues in and around the protocol and what happens there. Unionists not happy with that. They believe it does away with consent. Sinn Féin claiming that they have to do as they done and respect democracy. I spoke to Jerry Kelly earlier on of Sinn Féin, and he was talking to me more about the cost of living and what was affecting people.
And we said what we were going to do about it, that we were going to work together, we're rolling up our sleeves. We want the institutions set up again. We want the executive put up together. If we want to put the £1 billion into health, if we want to get the 330 million out to put into people's pockets to help them alleviate the situation over the cost of living and mitigate what is happening to them, then we have to do it immediately. So on Monday, what we need is the executive up, or at least within the next couple of days, and to work with the other parties. That's a commitment we give. That's a commitment.
Well, as you can see, he's keen to get everything back running and rolling. And on the doorsteps in our constituency reports, most people were worried about the cost of living. I'll be in the Balmoral show next week, the biggest agricultural show in Ireland, and there we will find out what people are really thinking about the cost of living and what politicians should be doing.
Doogie, thank you very much indeed, and fascinating thoughts there from Jerry Kelly as well. And we will continue to keep our reporters and correspondents there at that count until you get the full picture and the implications of it here on GB News TV and radio. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends for now. We've more to come in the final 25 minutes of this programme, including reflections upon the Assembly vote from someone who will be very familiar to many of you, who is intimately involved in the history of Northern Ireland politics, so don't miss a bit of it.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. It's 20 to 2 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. I wanted to have a final thought on those elections, especially the count that is slowly drawing to a close in Northern Ireland. And I'm delighted to welcome now someone I've known for a very long time, and that is Ian Paisley of the Democratic Unionist Party, and he represents North Antrim. Ian, thank you very much indeed for fitting us in on what I know is an incredibly busy time. I'm going to start with an odd question, and that is that, in case you didn't hear it, Dougie Beattie was just talking to Jerry Kelly of Sinn Féin, who, again, we both know and have watched over many, many years. And Kelly was talking about the cost of living crisis. He wasn't talking about border politics. He wasn't talking about the choice between the bullet or the ballot and what have you. Kelly talking about the cost of living. My goodness me, the politics of Northern Ireland have come a heck of a long way, have they not?
Yes, good afternoon, Alistair, and thank you for having me on your programme. And I suppose, yes, you can be forgiven for thinking that things are normal and totally normal, and that's where we would like them to be. But there are a couple of points. The leader of Sinn Féin yesterday declared on world media outlets that now the battle to have a united Ireland has commenced. And that's what this election was about. And of course, we also have the ongoing major problem of the protocol, which adds about 27% on haulage costs of goods coming to Northern Ireland, including foodstuffs, which accelerates and accentuates the cost of living crisis for everyone in Northern Ireland also. So the big issue of resolving the protocol stays there. And the question really over to Boris Johnson in Westminster is, you can have the protocol or you can have Stormont, but you can't have them both. And if you want to keep the protocol, Stormont will collapse. And if you fix the protocol, we have a chance of making Stormont work.
Sure. I'm going to reverse those and do the protocol first and then come to the border poll. And on the protocol, as an observer and a journalist, I'm getting very slightly confused because I know what the argument is about and borders down the Irish Sea and all the rest of it. But what I'm slightly confused about is what the signals are that are coming out of number 10 vis-à-vis proposed solutions, the Queen's speech, the need for fresh legislation. There are many within the Conservative Party here who say, got Article 16 anyway, just invoke it, and there you are. What are you hearing is the answer and the solution that Johnson is contemplating?
Well, invoking Article 16 might have worked last year, but things have moved on far too far for that now. The protocol is completely debilitating trade and destroying our place within the Union. And therefore the government has got to take much more decisive action, and indeed it appears unilateral action. I spoke last week to the Foreign Secretary in an aside behind the Speaker's chair, and she told me that the negotiations with Europe had run their course, they were over. Nothing else was there to be discussed. And if that's the case, then it really is over to Her Majesty's government to govern for all of the people of the United Kingdom, especially Northern Ireland, and to resolve this matter, because we can't wait around for Europe. This is killing us by millions, hundreds of millions of pounds a day in trade, and the impact on the cost of living, as I said, is accentuated as a result.
But would primary legislation in the Westminster Parliament override what is an international treaty which enshrines that protocol, which I know you are unhappy with and always have been clearly unhappy about? Just passing a law in Westminster doesn't necessarily change the international legal framework, does it?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think the intention on saying that you're going to do something but never actually doing something doesn't wear well with people. But if the government actually takes a decisive action, I think that will show true intention and a will to get something done. And where there's a will, we'll find a way of then fixing these issues. So I think the government has a duty to actually do something. Legislation, primary legislation would certainly help. But simply saying that we can kick this can down the road a little bit longer and wait for Europe to come up with another fudge, that isn't working. It hasn't worked for a year and 4 months. So let's not keep repeating that mistake. Let's see the government take decisive and direct actions.
Final question on that one, and then we'll go on to the border. Was your inevitable follow-up question to Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, behind the Speaker's chair, which is just an expression parliamentarians use to talk when they're out of sight and just having a quiet chat. Was your follow-up question, did it yield a reassuring answer from Liz Truss about what the Cabinet will do in your support?
No, to be fair, the conversation didn't go into that area. The kite flying that you and me have probably read in the Financial Times and the commentary since, that came after that conversation. And we will see what the government's true intention is. But as I've said, Alistair, we can have all sorts of fancy words, and with wonderful words from Mr. Frost, we've even had wonderful words from Mr. Johnson, the Prime Minister. But it's action that will change things, and we need decisive action at this point.
All right, let's then go back to the first point that you raised, very much in the context of Jerry Kelly talking there about cost of living rather than borders. You have been knocked back in the share of the popular vote quite sharply. But if you add up all of the people who take a unionist stance, and I know that the alliance are kind of slightly up for grabs between the two of us, there's no way that there's a numerical majority within Northern Ireland for ending the border and reverting to 32 counties, is there?
Correct. I would actually go further. Let's not even count the Alliance Party votes. Let's treat them as completely neutral on the border. If you take the Sinn Féin vote and the SDLP vote, those are actively for a united Ireland and say that's their ideal, that's their identity. There are just over 250,000 votes in Northern Ireland. The combined unionist vote, that's the three unionist parties plus independent unionists, is over 360,000 votes. So more than 100,000 ahead. So there's a decisive majority on that pure tribal head count, if you like. But that's not the point. The point is that if our politics is now reduced to a constant discussion about what if the border, we will never have stable politics, because everything will then be determined on that constant discussion, that negative toothache of a conversation of the border poll, the border poll, the border poll. And we have to actually get out of that. Otherwise, it will debilitate our politics. Look what it's done to Scotland. Scotland hasn't got over 2014 and their referenda. They're still talking about it, and they want to have another one. And we just can't have that gnawing away at the soul of Northern Ireland politics and doing harm to the political process.
But if there's a third of the people, even a third of the people, and I'm minded to reflect upon the journey in Scotland from devolution and Donald Dewar, man we both knew, and Tony Blair in that era, towards independence, and other forces, Westminster, wherever you want to place them, are resisting an emerging will of the people, that's dangerous democratically, isn't it, Ian?
Yeah, but we have to then, we can't see this in a vacuum, Alistair. We've got to see what the history of Ireland, the history of Northern Ireland has been in particular. If we have a situation where we're constantly talking about the border, it will talk down and depress politics. It will not allow our politics to move forward. And that's the thing that actually worries me, and worries me quite considerably, that we'll have constant negative tribal politics and we won't be able to get out of that cycle. Now, let's just say Nationalists had that conversation, Republicans had that conversation every single day. We would then, and say they even were successful, and they persuaded people to have a border poll, and even persuaded a slim majority to take us over into United Ireland. You haven't actually solved the question that Northern Ireland is a divided country, that it has a significant division between nationalists and unionists, and whether you're in the United Kingdom setup or whether in the Republic of Ireland setup, you will have a disenchanted community. And so having the border poll, if you like, even solved from a Republican's point of view, it still means that Northern Ireland unions are then going to be very, very unhappy, very discontent, but just in a different political diaspora. That's not possible. That doesn't solve anything. That just puts the problem into a different framework. We're about solving the actual problem, getting people to be content and work together and see that we can share this piece of the UK equally.
Intriguing, because as you said, to understand the issue, you have to go deep back into the history of Ireland / Northern Ireland. And I suspect that many would not have predicted what happened with the Good Friday Agreement and the Chuckle brothers sitting there being the first and Deputy First Minister. What I think an awful lot of people here, Ian, won't understand is Sinn Féin exists overwhelmingly to reunite 32 counties of Ireland because that's in their DNA, and you exist overwhelmingly within the DUP and your colleagues in the O Party, the official Unionist Party, to retain that link with the Union. There isn't a bridge long enough between those two positions. You just got to talk, get on with other stuff, but that is never going to be resolved, is it? Hand on heart?
I think that's true. They're diametrically opposed divisions. And the good thing is that the Republicans are no longer killing unionists for being unionists, and paramilitaries on the loyalist side are no longer retaliating against those campaigns of murder. That's the positive. So let's not ever get back to that, and let's keep it as a debate and a discussion and an ideological aspiration at one point and an ideological reality in the other. Let's stay in that frame of mind because, as I've said, I use the word tribes, and I think that's the fairest way to describe Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland does have two very obvious tribes. It also has a third middle ground, which is growing and can't be denied. But there are two main tribes in Northern Ireland, and all tribes, whether you're in one or the other or the middle, at some point, if there's a question asked, do you want to be in the United Kingdom or in the Republic of Ireland, you have to take a side in that. And that is where the cookie crumbles in Northern Ireland.
Just the conversation I wanted to end that part of our programme with. Ian, a real pleasure to see you always. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope the rest of your afternoon is a joy. Take care of yourself, and thank you very much indeed. Ian Paisley, DUP MP there for North Antrim. Now, away from all of the local government results and what's happening live in Northern Ireland, change the subject for our final piece. Skin cancer is one of the most common forms of cancer in the United Kingdom, and rates continue to rise with around 100,000 new cases each year. Now, May is Melanoma Awareness Month. Yes, those little dark marks you might find on your back, on your forehead, wherever they might be. This is Melanoma Awareness Month, and the charity Melanoma Fund has launched a brand new campaign to highlight the illness. Sun Guarding Sport launched this week and is supported by over 60 national governing bodies in sport, providing sun protection guidelines and advice. We thought that really mattered, not only to sports people, but to you as well. So we asked our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley, to look into the story for us. Here's her report.
Dan Whittaker is a skin cancer survivor who's raising awareness of the disease that nearly took his life as part of a brand new campaign launched by the Melanoma Fund. He was given running shoes as a Christmas gift, but they began to irritate a mole on his foot that was later found to be a malignant melanoma. Dan had to undergo 2 surgeries involving 90 stitches to remove the mole and surrounding skin, and it took 6 months for him to recover. Now he's encouraging people to remember to put on sunscreen to protect themselves from UV rays.
Not catching it early would have meant that the expectation of my life could have dramatically been reduced. The impact of the diagnosis is just immense. It's just fear, anxiety, anger, frustration, questions, how did it happen, shock. And that's not just for myself, that's for me and also family members as well, and friends. The impact is huge. Everybody plays a part, and as a 40-year-old male, I think over the last 10 years, I'm probably quite happy to say I've never cried as much, but it's that emotional impact that you get with it. And there was another element of the emotions that come to say this, you've got the worst form of skin cancer, which is malignant melanoma, and then then you have the operation and the surgery, but then you get another sense of feeling when you're then told later that this has not spread around your body. And ultimately now I'm doing all of this precaution, so all of the sun guarding whilst doing my sports to ensure that it does not spread around my body. And the recommendation to anybody, I would say, is prevention is better than any intervention and cure, and health and wellness in the sun is as important as kind of sun cancer prevention.
Melanoma Fund has launched a brand new campaign this month called Sun Guarding Sport, and Michelle Baker, Chief Executive Officer of the charity, says it's an innovative project.
It's all about protecting everyone in sport,
It's already supported by 60 national governing bodies of sport. So we're working to unite sport with this idea of sun protecting their participants, spectators and officials, to make sure everyone's aware that it's important to get out there but be protected. And obviously we're promoting get out there. It's not about, stay in, the sun's too warm. Get out there, but make sure you put key measures in place to make sure your skin's protected.
The charity's looking to spread the message of sun protection far and wide in the UK, with Sunburn travelling around Britain to raise awareness. Anna Riley, GB News, Wakefield.
Not a scaremonger at all, but just remember that adage, it could happen to you. And as Tracy Crouch and others said about various forms of cancer, self-examination really does matter. Brilliant report there from Anna Riley. Some final thoughts, not from me, but from you. Let's start with James on the local elections. We here in the north of Ireland have been sold down the river by Boris Johnson and his lies and falsehoods, and Lord Frost and the rest of the Tory party lied to us in order to get his oven-ready deal done. Well, that's a view. I hope we've balanced it with other interviews as well. And finally, John, the Red Wall went Tory because of Brexit. The Red Wall will stay Tory so long as Boris-inspired non-ideological politics continues. A change of leadership in favour of a regular Thatcherite cipher would be a disaster. Partygate is meaningless froth. Stick to the issues. We try. We really do try. That's it for today. I'm back at 12 o'clock tomorrow, Sunday, for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I hope you can join me then. First, I offer you the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking bright and dry for many, but with rain holding on across the far southeast. Let's take a look at the details. There'll be plenty of warm spring sunshine across southwest England this afternoon. Temperatures will once again be above average for this time of year, reaching around 20 Celsius. However, it's a different story for southeast England. Here it'll be largely cloudy with the risk of some showery rain in places. Heading over to Wales, it's going to be mostly dry and sunny this afternoon, with just a little bit of cloud bubbling up from time to time and feeling warm for all. Now, there's a risk of a few showers as we move over to the Midlands and into northwest England, though most places will stay dry. A little fresher along the coast, but highs of 18 Celsius inland. Northeast England will be mainly dry too, with just the odd